Hey guys, how's it going? So this is gonna be a little different from my usual stuff because there's a lot of drama, rightfully so, about the recent update to the of like the Fujifilm's mirrorless camera firmware update that was, we were promised that it would increase, well, not increase, but give us a boost in autofocus, namely, subject tracking, or I guess we call it subject tracking in camera. And that was something a lot of us were asking for from Fuji. And, we were all hoping that they really delivered with the recent firmware. But as you can see that there's a lot of upset content creators and photographers, videographers alike that the firmware actually made the autofocus a bit more worse than it's supposed to do. Like, it basically gave us the opposite effect of what we wanted. And I just want to chime in on my opinion on that and what I've found in the past and what worked for me and what possibly might not work anymore, depending on how Fuji reworks the firmware for the next update or hotfix, I guess. So right off the bat, like, I've been with Fujifilm since I started doing photography and doing some videos on the side since, pre-COVID, so probably 4 or 5 years ago, or probably shorter than that. And honestly, I didn't pick Fujifilm just for their amazing, autofocus. I hope you caught that sarcasm. I picked Fujifilm for a couple number of things. One is that it is a very fun camera to use out, in the world. Because the fact that it has that retro look to it, namely, coming from an XT-4, that was my very first Fujifilm camera, and I just loved everything about it. Just like, just to be able to have specific dials, like the shutter speed, the ISO, and even the compensation exposure dial. Sorry, I meant to say exposure dial. And everything felt so right for me, and I didn't hesitate of buying one brand new right away. And you know what, like, I knew off the bat that it didn't have crazy good autofocus like Sony, Nikon, Canon, Lumix, all those like other brands. And I accepted the idea that Fujifilm will never ever have a good enough autofocus that would make the general, like, community, or just generally people would be happy with it, right? Because it's hard not to compare Fujifilm's autofocus to Sony's and Canon's and Nikon's and all the other brands that are able to nail the autofocus down to the bat. And you know what, I don't blame them, right? Because especially when you're willing to spend so much money on a body and a camera, and with that kind of price point, you would expect that it would have good autofocus. So that was my perspective, just my opinion. Like, you might have a different opinion than I do when it comes to about not expecting good autofocus. And I was still able to capture a lot of what I see, my portraits, even weddings, with my XT-4, right? And I for sure, there was a lot of like learning, like deep learning curve to be able to make sure like I would nail 90% of my shots, especially the really important ones that mattered the most to me and to my clients. And so far, it never failed me at all, and that's that's saying a lot. I definitely don't rely on AFC. Like, I will never ever rely on that, just because it's just not reliable. If I were to shoot in, not shoot, but I would like, if I do events, no, not even events, if I do wildlife photography and like sports photography that relies on fast shutter speed to capture like animals or just players playing their sports, right? And also a reliable subject tracking, I would go look for some. I would go look at some other brands instead, like Sony or Canon, right? That's reality. If you do that, if you do strictly sports photography and wildlife, just go to them, and you can keep your Fujifilm as like a personal like camera, or even like more like slower paced jobs like weddings and portraits, right? That doesn't require like a lot of like fast moving like subjects and whatnot. And yeah, I think that could be a good solution. But yeah, sure, you'll be stuck with two systems, or not stuck, but you'll be spending a lot of money, investing in two different like systems. And with the with Fujifilm's recent new generation cameras, the XT-5, the XH2S, and the XH2, the GFX 100 Mark II, X100VI, and the upcoming 100S Mark II that's about to come out in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I believe. They all boast, the new processor that actually not power, but it provides a better autofocus experience, and I believe that it really did, compared to the previous generation, right? But with this generation, with the X5 processor, it does make Fujifilm's autofocus much better than was before, especially in the AFC area. And yeah, I think initially it did a pretty good job. It definitely was an upgrade from the previous generation, but it wasn't any close to Sony or Canon level of autofocus, which is fine, right? It's still an improvement from the previous generation. So with that being said, though, when the XH2S and XH2 came out initially, there was a couple problems that some photographers and YouTubers have pointed out, is that it, especially even I experienced too, is that my XH2 and my XT5 would miss focus, or I guess a fake focus, I guess you would call it. Essentially, for subject tracking on AFC mode, right, you would have the camera telling you, hey, this person focused by the green box. If it turns green, it basically is telling me that, hey, your subject's in focus, you can now take a photo, right? Or even video. So I did, right? So I trusted the system to tell me, hey, it's in focus, you can go ahead and take a photo, which I did. And I was in a rude awakening for the first 2 months, because a lot of my shots were in misfocus. It wasn't focused at all. It was really weird too, because and when you view the photos in your camera, right, there's usually a label that says face detected in camera, telling you, hey, you're able to now focus based on based on what you're using. And it was a little funny, because when you transfer that over to into Capture Pro 1 or Capture 1 Pro or Lightroom, you can notice that it didn't focus at all. It misfocused. It focused on something completely different, away from the face and the eyes. It could have focused on their hand for some reason, their nose, or the background, or not focus at all. And that was really, really, really weird to me. And I wasn't the only one that had that issue. There were a couple YouTubers I found on YouTube that had the same issue, and going on Reddit and all Facebook forums, they all said the same thing, right? And it was a weird time. But eventually, Fuji was able to get themselves together and release firmware to actually fix some of the issues that we encountered. And ever since then, I haven't had a lot of or barely any misfocus using AFC, which is which is great. It Fuji took like the issues they've had initially when they initially launched, listened to their customer base, their fans, their community, and fixed it. Right, that's a win for me. That's a win for you too. So fast forward a year later, then bam, firmware 4.0, I believe, promised us that it would improve autofocus even further, which is a great thing. A lot of us really love that idea that, hey, maybe that with a couple more firmware updates like this, maybe Fujifilm's cameras could, for autofocus, can be on par as like Canon and Sony, right? That would be a dream if that was the case. But no. Once they released the firmware updates, issues immediately started to come up. I'm sure you've seen videos of different YouTubers that did the same tests, specifically for like the touchscreen subject tracking. And it was so weird because I even had that issue too when I was using my XH2 to do my recordings. And I would just click on the camera, click on the, not the camera, but the touchscreen for subject tracking, and initially it did recognize my face, right? Everything was in a green box, but I started to notice that if I were to put my hand close to the camera, right, it would focus on my hands. But the issue is that once I take this off, right, it's not focusing on me anymore, even though there's a green box on my face, right? And I thought, oh, that was weird. Maybe I misfocused initially or something like that. So I kept doing the same tests over and over and over again, and sucks I don't have recording of that because I wasn't able to record using my Animus recorder. So like I said, I kept doing this part, right, making sure it's focusing my hand, and half the time, or actually all the time, it doesn't refocus on my face, even though there's a green box highlighting that, hey, you're in focus, but that's not the case. Oh, and also I'm not using the XH2 right now. I'm using my S5 Mark II X for this. So don't rely on this focus because Lumix autofocus is really good. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird situation because there are two sides to the situation. Is like one, the people are saying that they're having issues focusing with the new firmware updates, or just plain out saying that the focus is much more worse than it was before the firmware updates. And there's the other side saying that their autofocus is working fine for the updates. There's no issues. You're just being a hater. And you know what? I think that's really weird that there's two sides to this, because it's like you're just ignoring the fact that there is an issue with this firmware update, which isn't the case because there is an issue with this firmware that's making the autofocus much worse prior to updating this. And in my opinion, hopefully Fuji would fix this as soon as possible, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that are so upset that they're going to start thinking of switching over to a different system, right? Especially when you're relying on a decent autofocus that requires that kind of like accuracy for their client work or just for their personal work. And yeah, I mean I don't blame them, but from my end, my opinion is that I'm not gonna tell you that you're wrong, that autofocus is bad, but I'm also not gonna tell you that the autofocus is perfect, which isn't. By far, it's not perfect. I'm in a mindset where I know what I'm getting into using a Fujifilm system, that their autofocus won't be as good as any other camera brands. That's just a fact. Not an opinion, but a fact. Two is that that I keep that in mind where when I have to really make sure like my photos are in frame, in focus, and in focus properly to where I want them to be focused in. I can't rely on the autofocus in Fuji. So I'm doing my parts to make sure that everything's in focus. And yeah, it kind of sucks that it's more on the user's end to make sure that everything looks great than relying on the tools that we paid thousands of dollars to help us make our work easier. But I mean, I think that just it is what it is. And I hope that Fuji is able to fix this problem for the next firmware updates, or at least acknowledge the issues. But yeah, guys, that's just my long rant, or my just opinion about the whole thing. Just that, hopefully they fix the issue. But yeah. Good night.